A woman is kidnapped in the middle of the night, held for 48 hours, repeatedly assaulted, and then released. She makes it home, and the first thing law enforcement does, publicly, at a press conference, is accuse her of making the whole thing up. Today, we're breaking down the Denise Huskins and Aaron Quinn case as covered in Netflix's American Nightmare. Specifically, what actually happened that night in Vallejo, how a cascade of institutional failures made everything worse, and what Huskins and Quinn have done with that experience since. By the end of this episode, you'll understand not just the case itself, but the deeper systemic cracks it exposed. My co-host has been deep in the details on this one, so let's get into it. Walk me through what we're actually dealing with here.
So the case starts in the early morning hours of March 23rd, 2015. Denise Huskins and her boyfriend Aaron Quinn are asleep in his home in Vallejo, California. Around 3 a.m., they're woken up by a man's voice saying, quote, "This is a robbery. We are not here to hurt you. Stay calm." And Huskins later described it to CBS News. She said her eyes shot open and she saw flashing white light on the walls, red laser dots scanning the room. She thought it was a dream at first.
That detail alone is so disorienting. Red laser dots, a voice in the dark.
Right, and it gets stranger. The intruder, they never saw his face, was wearing a wetsuit. He claimed to be part of a group, but he did all the talking. Huskins and Quinn later referred to him only as the Voice. He instructed Huskins to tie Quinn up with zip ties, then he tied her up too, made them both drink a sedative, and put blacked out swim goggles over their eyes.
A wetsuit, swim goggles. This sounds almost theatrical.
It does, and that theatricality is actually part of why police later struggled to believe it. But here's what happened next. Huskins was told she'd be taken for 48 hours and held until Quinn completed certain tasks, including going to a bank for ransom money. According to the FBI affidavit obtained by NBC News, the ransom demand was $8,500. Then Mueller put Huskins in the trunk of Quinn's own car and drove her to his home in South Lake Tahoe.
And Quinn was left behind.
Left behind, drugged, zip-tied, with a security camera that had been mounted in his living room to monitor him. He was warned that if he contacted police, they'd kill Denise. So when he eventually woke up and freed himself, he faced this impossible decision, and he described it to CBS News later. He said, "My thought was, if I call the police, I know I'm going to be safe. But then my fear is, am I actually killing Denise?" He eventually called 911.
That's an unbearable position to be in.
And the moment he called, things started going sideways in a different way. The Vallejo Police Department responded, and almost immediately investigators began questioning his story. The bizarre details, the wetsuit, the goggles, the hours he waited before calling, all of it made them suspicious of Quinn rather than of an actual kidnapper.
So they flipped the script almost instantly.
Almost instantly. And this is where the Gone Girl comparison enters the picture, which is worth unpacking because it shaped everything that followed. The 3-part Netflix docuseries, directed by Felicity Morris and Bernadette Higgins, the same filmmakers behind The Tinder Swindler, it's called American Nightmare, and it documents how police and media framed Huskins as a real-life version of the faked abduction in David Fincher's 2014 thriller Gone Girl,
which is based on Gillian Flynn's novel. And that comparison is doing a lot of heavy lifting in terms of how the public received this story.
Exactly. Because once that frame gets attached to a story, it's almost impossible to shake. The media ran with it, and law enforcement leaned into it. 2 days after the kidnapping, Huskins turned up safe, 400 miles away in Huntington Beach, outside her father's apartment, just hours before the ransom deadline. And that same day, the Vallejo Police Department held a press conference.
And what did they say?
They announced they had found no evidence of a kidnapping and accused Huskins and Quinn of faking the abduction. The department's spokesman, Kenny Park, expressed what NBC Bay Area described as disgust over the resources supposedly wasted. 40 detectives had been assigned to the case. Park said, quote, "It was such an incredible story. We initially had a hard time believing it, and upon further investigation, we couldn't substantiate any of the things he was saying."
40 detectives, and their conclusion was that it was fake.
While Huskins was very much alive and had just survived 2 days of captivity and repeated sexual assault, and the attorneys for the couple pushed back immediately, they told reporters that police had not provided, quote, an iota of evidence that the kidnapping was faked, and that Quinn's delay in reporting was explained by the fact that he had been bound and drugged.
Which is, a pretty reasonable explanation.
You'd think, but the institutional momentum had already shifted. And this is where the interrogation piece becomes really important, because it reveals a systemic problem that goes way beyond this one case. According to CBS News California, Quinn was subjected to an 18-hour interrogation. And instead of tracing the ransom calls that Mueller was sending to Quinn's phone, investigators were trying to get Quinn to confess to killing Huskins.
Wait, they were trying to get him to confess to a murder while she was still alive?
While she was still alive and being held in South Lake Tahoe. And Huskins later said to CBS News, quote, I would have been rescued and 2 families would have been saved. Because the approach investigators took, what critics call confession-driven interrogation, meant they weren't actually investigating. They had already decided on the answer and were working backward.
That's a really damning framing. They weren't looking for the truth, they were building a case for a conclusion they'd already reached.
And there's one detail that really crystallizes how badly this went. According to Netflix Life's coverage of the case, the Vallejo police confiscated Quinn's phone and put it on airplane mode, which meant they actively disabled the one tool that could have traced Mueller's ransom calls. The very act of treating Quinn as a suspect directly prevented them from finding Huskins.
That's not just a mistake, that's an active harm.
It really is. And Quinn also took a polygraph test, which an FBI agent told him he failed. This is something the couple later described in a book about their ordeal, as reported by NBC Bay Area. So you have this compounding picture, the phone disabled, an 18-hour interrogation, a polygraph result used against him, and a public press conference calling them liars, all while the actual kidnapper was free.
So how does Mueller actually get caught? Because it clearly wasn't through any of this.
It wasn't. And this is where the story takes a turn that's almost more infuriating than the original failure. Mueller was caught because of a completely separate crime. He committed another home invasion in Dublin, California, and Dublin police detective Misty Carousu started investigating. According to Netflix Life's reporting, after a tip from Mueller's mother, Carousu and her team obtained a search warrant for the family's home in South Lake Tahoe.
And that's where the physical evidence came in.
That's where everything clicked. According to CBS News California, Detective Carousu found a strand of Huskins' hair attached to a pair of blacked-out swim goggles, the same goggles used to blindfold her. Carousu's persistence in tracking down who that hair belonged to is what ultimately vindicated Huskins and Quinn and proved to the world they had been telling the truth.
One detective, one strand of hair. That's what it took.
One detective doing the actual investigative work that should have been done from the start. And who is Matthew Mueller, by the way? According to Factual America's coverage of the legal aftermath, he was a Harvard-educated former lawyer, which adds this deeply unsettling layer. The person who orchestrated this incredibly methodical, almost theatrical kidnapping had a law degree. That might explain why the setup was so elaborate and why he knew exactly how to make the story sound unbelievable.
A Harvard-educated lawyer in a wetsuit. I mean, you genuinely cannot make this up.
And there's another detail that comes out in the Netflix Life coverage. Mueller apparently didn't even intend to kidnap Huskins specifically. He was supposedly trying to kidnap Quinn's ex-girlfriend, a woman named Andrea, who also had blonde hair. So Huskins went through all of this because of a case of mistaken identity.
That's almost incomprehensible.
It is. And when Mueller was eventually arrested, he pleaded guilty to kidnapping and sexually assaulting Huskins. According to Factual America, he received a 40-year federal prison sentence for kidnapping and rape and was ordered to pay $5,386 in restitution.
And what happened with the Vallejo Police Department? Were there any consequences for them?
There were, eventually. According to Factual America, Huskins and Quinn sued the city of Vallejo for their mishandling of the case and reached a $2.5 million settlement in 2021. The Vallejo Police Department also issued an apology, acknowledging their mistake in doubting the couple's account.
A settlement and an apology 6 years later.
6 years later. And the documentary itself, American Nightmare, dropped on Netflix on January 17th, 2024. All 3 episodes released at once. According to Wikipedia, it has a 96% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes, and the critical consensus reads, quote, "Equal parts infuriating and suspenseful, American Nightmare is an instructive chronicle of institutional bias, making a horrifying crime even worse." Netflix also said it was their highest-rated documentary of 2024.
Highest-rated documentary of 2024. That's a massive audience engaging with this story.
And I think that reach matters, because the documentary didn't just tell the story, it created a platform for Huskins and Quinn to push for real change. According to CBS News California, the couple is now working with El Dorado County District Attorney Vern Pearson to educate law enforcement from around the world on what proponents call science-based interviewing, described as a more effective and ethical method of interrogation.
So they're literally retraining the people who failed them.
Using excerpts from Quinn's own 18-hour interrogation as a teaching tool. CBS News California reported that Quinn shared excerpts from that interrogation, which is now being used to help retrain officers. The victims became the educators. That's a remarkable thing to do with that kind of trauma.
And the case keeps generating new developments, right? It's not just a closed chapter.
Not even close. According to CBS News California's reporting from January 2025, Mueller has now confessed to at least 2 other crimes committed in the month after Huskins' kidnapping, while law enforcement was publicly shaming her and Quinn instead of searching for him. 2 weeks after the kidnapping, he allegedly committed another crime in neighboring Contra Costa County.
So while the press conference was happening, while Quinn was being interrogated for 18 hours, Mueller was out there committing more crimes.
That's exactly right. And Huskins and Quinn said they knew there were more victims, but according to CBS News California, the FBI agents assigned to the case were not interested in working with them. The FBI had been investigating the couple for faking the kidnapping and faced public backlash after Mueller struck again and was ultimately arrested by a different agency entirely.
There's something almost surreal about that, the FBI investigating the victims while the perpetrator is still active.
And it took, as CBS News California put it, a decade, a documentary, a small-town police chief, and a rural district attorney to get anyone to listen. That's the timeline of accountability in this case.
And there's still more unfolding. There's a privacy issue that came out of all this too.
Yeah, this one is genuinely shocking. According to CBS News California's reporting from March 2026, while Huskins and Quinn were working with law enforcement to reopen cold cases tied to Mueller, they discovered that Mueller and his then-wife had been given copies of explicit case evidence during his trial, videotaped recordings of the sexual assaults that Mueller himself had made while committing the crimes.
Wait, he had recordings of the assaults?
He recorded them, and those recordings became part of the legal discovery process. Mueller represented himself for a period, with his wife acting as his legal assistant. And according to CBS News California, a decade after his conviction, his now ex-wife confirmed she still had that evidence in her home. Huskins and Quinn are now preparing to testify on behalf of a victim's privacy bill in California to close that legal loophole.
So 10 years later, they're still fighting, still finding new layers of harm that need to be addressed.
And Huskins put it really powerfully to CBS News California. She said, quote, "It is terrifying to me to think of how many victims there might still be out there that are living in fear and wondering if they're going to be attacked again, and that their perpetrators are still out there. That's not just about her case. That's a statement about the systemic failure to take victims seriously."
That quote lands differently when you know everything she went through to even be in a position to say it.
It really does. And I think the Rotten Tomatoes critical consensus for the documentary captures something important. Institutional bias making a horrifying crime even worse. That's the through line of this entire case. The crime was terrible, but the institutional response compounded it at every turn.
Let's talk about that for a second, because I think it's worth naming what that institutional bias actually looked like in practice. It wasn't just skepticism, it was active.
It was active and it was public. The press conference calling it a hoax, that's not just an internal investigative misstep. That's law enforcement using their platform to publicly defame 2 people who had just survived a violent crime. And the Gone Girl comparison that the media ran with, that framing did real damage because it gave the institutional failure a cultural shorthand that made it feel almost reasonable.
Right, because Gone Girl was this massive cultural moment. And once that comparison is out there, it's almost impossible to walk back.
Exactly. And it's worth noting that the Netflix Life coverage specifically called the media's treatment of Huskins a sexist attack, one that made her trauma all the more difficult to work through. The framing wasn't neutral, it was gendered. The assumption that a woman would fake her own kidnapping for attention or to manipulate her boyfriend, that's a specific kind of disbelief that has a long history.
And the documentary makes that visible in a way that a news article can't quite do.
That's what makes American Nightmare effective as a piece of storytelling. It uses interviews, interrogation footage, and audio recordings, according to Times coverage, to let you hear and see the machinery of that disbelief in real time. It's not just being told that Quinn was interrogated for 18 hours. You're hearing it.
And the documentary was nominated for Best True Crime Documentary at the 9th Critics' Choice Documentary Awards, according to Wikipedia. So the industry recognized it too.
It did. And I think the reason it resonated so broadly beyond just true crime audiences is that it's really a story about what happens when the institutions you're supposed to trust decide you're the problem. That's a fear that cuts across a lot of different experiences.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes it linger. It's not just here's a crime that was solved, it's here's what it cost to be believed.
And the cost was enormous. A $2.5 million settlement doesn't undo 6 years of being publicly called liars. It doesn't undo the 18-hour interrogation, or the phone being put on airplane mode, or the additional crimes Mueller committed while investigators were focused on the wrong people.
So when you step back from all of this, the kidnapping, the institutional failure, the documentary, the decade of aftermath, what does this case actually tell us about how the system handles victims?
It tells us that confirmation bias isn't just an abstract cognitive concept. It has real physical consequences. When investigators decided Quinn was lying, they stopped looking for Mueller. They put the phone on airplane mode. They ran an 18-hour confession-driven interrogation. Every one of those decisions was downstream of a conclusion they'd already reached. And Huskins paid for that with 2 days of captivity and assault that could have been cut short.
And the critics who reviewed the documentary used the phrase, antiquated interrogation training. That's from the CBS News California reporting. So this isn't just about bad actors, it's about a method that's baked into how officers are trained.
Right. And that's actually why the work Huskins and Quinn are doing now matters so much. They're not just advocating for themselves, they're trying to change the training that produces these outcomes. Science-based interviewing, as it's described by proponents in the CBS News California reporting, is positioned as a more effective and ethical alternative to confession-driven interrogation. The idea being that you get better information and you don't destroy innocent people in the process.
Here's what this really comes down to, I think. Denise Huskins came home after 48 hours of captivity and was immediately handed a second nightmare, one built by the people who were supposed to protect her. And instead of retreating from that, she and Quinn spent the next decade turning it into something that might actually prevent it from happening to someone else.
That's the part of this story that doesn't get enough attention. The documentary is gripping, the crime is shocking, the institutional failure is infuriating, but the decade of work that followed, that's the part that actually has the potential to change things. The interrogation footage being used to retrain officers, the victim's privacy bill being pushed through the California legislature, the cold cases being reopened because Huskins and Quinn kept pushing.
And it took a documentary, Netflix's highest rated of 2024, to give them the platform to do it, which is its own kind of commentary on how accountability works or doesn't work without public pressure.
A decade, a documentary, a small-town police chief, and a rural district attorney. That's what it took. Not the FBI, not the Vallejo PD, one detective who followed a strand of hair on a pair of swim goggles.
One strand of hair. That's the thing I keep coming back to. The entire vindication of two people, the unraveling of a kidnapper who had been operating for years, came down to one detective doing the actual work.
And that detective, Misty Carausu from Dublin, California, wasn't even investigating the Huskins case. She was investigating a separate home invasion. The connection was made almost by accident, or rather, by the kind of persistent, detail-oriented work that the original investigation completely lacked.
So the lesson isn't just about this case. It's about what happens when investigators stop asking questions and start building a case for an answer they've already decided on.
Exactly. And Huskins said it herself. If police had traced those ransom calls instead of interrogating Quinn, she would have been rescued. 2 families would have been saved. That's not speculation. That's a direct line between a procedural choice and a preventable harm.
She came home and was accused. And then she spent the next decade making sure the system that accused her had to look at itself. That's the story. And it's still unfolding. The privacy bill, the cold cases, the retraining work. American Nightmare, the documentary, may be a 2024 release, but the American Nightmare for Denise Huskins and Aaron Quinn is still being processed, still being fought, still generating change. That's worth sitting with.